Continuous link settlement. In the year of the crisis, global foreign exchange trade rose dramatically and influenced the way in which many of the financial institutions around the world were affected. I have here with me Rob Close, the CEO of CLS and the CEO of CLS Bank, the world's leading settlement agency for foreign exchange trade. Rob's organization takes care of $4 trillion worth of trade a day, 600,000 instructions, and about 50% or 55% of global foreign exchange settlements around the world. Thank you very much for speaking to us today. Rob, tell us what you learned in the year of the crisis.
Just to correct one fact, we're now about 75% of the interbank market. So 25% missing, but we have 75%.
But interbank does not mean the total volume of global.
It means pretty much the available volume, because the rest of the volume is the bank with its clients, and they do not need to be settled between the banks. So in terms of what we call the available market, we're about 75%.
Okay, and there is no real market outside of the banking system for foreign exchange?
The alternative is that banks can settle via the correspondent banking network.
Okay.
The reason why CLS was created was the recognition by the central banks many years ago that there were big systemic risks for the industry if banks were to settle via the correspondent bank network. So for example, if banks are doing trading dollars against yen, you deliver the yen to Japan, and you hope to get the dollars back in the New York day. And if the bank that owes you the dollars goes bankrupt, you don't get the money.
Right.
So CLS was created to take away that risk. We're a bank. We settle the instructions of all the participating institutions on the books of our bank, and it's the debits and the credit together that gives rise to the finality of settlement.
I take it that in the year of the crisis, that was when your proposition was tested the most, because among the banks that went under or were highly stressed were the founding member banks of CLS. And you created an environment where the settlement risk was taken out of the equation, and regardless of the institutions themselves. Yes. Would that be correct to say?
Yes. And in the Lehman's week alone, we settled $26.3 trillion, 4.4 million instructions, including the Lehman Bank instructions that were in the system for that day. And we did that very, very effectively. One of the challenges for CLS previously had been that some of the banks did not accept that settlement risk existed. They would say to me that the banks that they traded with were too big to fail.
Right.
Lehman showed that that's not the case.
Right, but would you say that there were pre-settlement risks and post-settlement risks that were still at play, in the Lehman environment?
Yes.
And there were members of your institution that had to take on some of that risk themselves?
The biggest risk in foreign exchange is the settlement risk, relating from the fact that you deliver one currency and you hope to get the other. There is pre-settlement risk, for example, with the forward book. But to put it into perspective, the forwards are about, I think 75% of the forward book is 4 months or under. So the risk of the replacement risk, the pre-settlement risk, is that we've traded, you fail, I have to now go into the market and replace that trade, and if the market's moved against me, I may have lost money. Mm. But that's a much smaller risk than the settlement risk of settling the currencies on the day.
Now, in terms of the instruments that you're settling, how important is the time lag of the instrument? Like if it's a spot risk, if it's a forward risk, if it's a if it's a trading risk, did that show up during that crisis? Yeah.
So what happens now when trading happens, within about 30 minutes of the trade, the trade comes into CLS, whether it's a spot or a forward. If it's a 10-year forward, that's going to sit there within CLS for 10 years until the day of settlement. And then on the day of settlement, the spots, the maturing forwards, they're all settled together, and we don't distinguish between them. So on the day we're dealing with the settlement risk issue, and we deal with that very effectively.
Well, what did you learn from the crisis, and what were the elements that needed to be tweaked as a result?
Yeah, I think the banks learned that settlement risk did exist,
yes.
And as a result of that, there's now more pressure from banks on their counterparties to use CLS. Previously, I as a bank might trade with you even if you did not want to use CLS, because I wanted liquidity, I wanted to do as much trading as possible. Now, I won't trade with you if you don't have an effective strategy for taking out settlement risk. So that's changed the nature of the market.
Right.
We also learned there's a number of process changes we can make within CLS and with the banks, and we've incorporated those. So for example, notwithstanding the fact that Lehman's, the entity in CLS, did not go bankrupt into the weekend after the first bankruptcy, some of the institutions that had instructions against Lehman's wanted to take them out of the CLS system.
So legally, you should not be touching them, but because of the...
Well, if you didn't need to, it was better to leave them inside the system, because you had the certainty of settlement,
right,
or you had the certainty that you couldn't lose the capital.
Right.
But two institutions decided they needed to take them outside, because with their the closeout agreements, although the entity inside CLS has not failed, it was still caught up within the closeout agreements. So therefore they wanted to take them out. They wanted to take out a high volume, and they found out that the processes weren't in place for that to happen. Right. So for example, we've worked together now to make it possible, should it ever happen again, for those instructions to be taken away. But the best thing is to keep them inside, because that gives the certainty.
So the certainty of the transactions.
Yes.
But do you then also close them out? Do you take a position in terms of not allowing them to trade further? Yeah.
We don't do anything. The market decides in terms of closing them out. The market decides whether it wants to trade with banks, and if there's concern about the exposure of a bank, may stop trading. On the day of settlement, we ask everyone to pay in funds, and if they pay in funds and the funds satisfy our risk management tests, then we will settle the instructions. We'll settle them safely, but we ourselves do not take a position.